Welcome to this edition of our weekly webinar series sponsored by the Committee on the Present Danger China. This is a program we've done now for, I think, at least 2 years, aimed at a single purpose, and that is raising awareness on the part of Americans, most especially, of the threat we face from the Chinese Communist Party and the various ways in which that threat is being advanced, unbeknownst to most of us, because of the, well, they call it unrestricted warfare character of the assault they've engaged against us for decades. Sadly, most Americans are oblivious to the fact that these are even adversaries of ours, and for good reason. Too few of our elected officials and other leaders have spoken directly to this point. I'm pleased to say that President Trump has explicitly described the Chinese Communists as foreign adversaries. We tend at the Committee on the Present Danger China to use the phrase mortal enemies. But at the very least, it's not something benign, like, competitors or rivals. And that's because there is a recognition, and I think it is growing, that what the Chinese are up to is war. It is not the kinetic kind so far, but it is taking myriad other manifestations. And it is being relentlessly pursued by them. We're going to talk in the course of this program about one of those relentless lines of attack, if you will, that we've touched on in the past and often with the featured presenter in this particular program, Cleo Pascal, namely the political warfare that the Chinese Communist Party is using to insinuate itself into and otherwise exert control over the Western Pacific, the first and second island chains as they're known, as well as the littorals, the areas like Japan and South Korea and, of course, Taiwan and the Philippines. We're interested in understanding not only how they are pursuing this objective of gaining control of this immense area, the waters above it, the materials and resources underneath it, as well as what makes up the airspace and even the outer space overhead. We're also going to talk about the implications of such control, should they gain it, for us, both in the region, for our vital interests there, and they are many, but also for us here in the United States, east of these islands. This is a moment when I think it is particularly appropriate to being focused on the Central Pacific, what our guest Cleo Pascal calls the American heartland, in the watery section of it, and indeed the western frontier. And this is coming into sharp relief as we speak, because we just lost one of the great champions of this area, of our interests in it, our presence there, and the need to protect those interests and otherwise safeguard our country by fundamentally having the presence, having the ability to project power, having the ability to defend our border, and our allies and our trade routes and all of the other things that make this part of the world so strategically vital and so much up for grabs at this moment. We're going to talk about, in particular, something that Cleo Pascal will be personally attending in the course of the day. And I want to say she is up with us in the wee hours of the day, on which the late Arnold Palacios, the governor of the Northern Mariana Islands, who passed away last week and who was that champion whom I spoke, and what his passing, which will be commemorated today with his funeral and the memorial service accompanying it, means for us, and frankly, again, for the free world, most especially in the water reaches of the Western Pacific. Cleo Pascal is, as I think you all now know, a senior non-resident fellow of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. She is a regular columnist for the Sunday Guardian, I believe in India, if I've got that right. She is also truly one of the great experts. I call her a binational treasure, as she hails from Canada originally, but she's very much focused on our interests in the United States as well. A world-class expert on this part of the world, and it does not have, frankly, enough of such experts, certainly engaging as she does with great effect here in Washington, D.C. and in our work, notably of the Committee on the Present Danger of China, more generally. We are deeply grateful to her for all of that, and most especially for her willingness to make enormous personal sacrifices to participate in programs like this with some regularity, and we're delighted to welcome her once again to the Committee on the Present Danger of China's webinar on the question of will the security of America's western frontier perish with Northern Mariana's governor, Palacios. Cleo, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for covering this. And I wish it wasn't 3 a.m. so that I could open up the hotel bathroom. Sorry, this is. I'm a little jet lagged, so this could get interesting. Open up the hotel curtain behind me, and you could see how beautiful it is here. So, before launching into everything that's gone wrong here, first of all, I would just like to say how beautiful it is. And this is the island chain, the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands. The southernmost island, Rota, is just about 60 miles north of Guam. So Guam is actually the southern Mariana Islands. This is the Northern Mariana Islands. Thank you very much, Oleg. This is a map of the Pacific showing exclusive economic zones. That's what the gray parts are. They show, because for every little island, you can claim up to 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone around it. And often the U.S. maps will end with Hawaii. In this map, Hawaii is that large patch to the east, and you can see all those other dark blue things are the United States of America. So you have down in the south, you have American Samoa. Then circled in red, you have the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands, where I am, and just below it is Guam. Bright green is Taiwan. So you can see that the U.S. is very, very much in the Pacific. This is U.S. soil with American citizens living on them. The waters of the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands, where we are now, are contiguous with not just the waters of Guam, but the waters of Japan. So people will often say they're remote, but they're remote if you're sitting in New Jersey. If you're sitting in Japan or Korea or Taiwan, they're about a 3-4 hour flight. So this, where I am now, is close, within 3-4 hours, of some of the world's major population centers. And this place is beautiful. Rhoda's the Garden Island. It has incredible vegetation. You can go hunting for deer there. Here on Saipan, where I am, the beaches are beautiful. There's historical sites all over the place because this belonged to Japan from 1914 to 1944. And then this was the site of one of the most brutal World War II battles. This is the bonsai charges, suicide cliffs, all of those things that they highlight in World War II battle movies happened here. And you can go and commemorate at many historic sites, including a very good World War II museum. And then the island in between Rhoda and Saipan, where I am now, called Tinian, almost exactly 80 years ago, 80 years ago next week, the Enola Gay took off from Tinian and began the chain of events that ended World War II in the Pacific. And August 15th will be the surrender, 80th anniversary of the surrender of Japan. So this is one of the most interesting parts of the United States, one of the most beautiful parts of the United States, and it's one of the newest parts of the United States. After the war, it became, because Japan's mandate obviously was no longer extant, it became UN trust territory entrusted to the United States. There was a period right after the war, and for quite a few years, when Saipan was closed, the CIA was running all sorts of training operations here under a program that was run by what was called the Naval Technical Training Unit. And it then became the site for the Micronesian Congress, where delegates from all over Micronesia, those 3 countries just below Guam, Palau, Micronesia, and Marshall Islands, came here to Saipan to decide their post-war future. And the result of that was those 3 countries, Palau, Micronesia, Marshall Islands, voted to become independent, but to develop this very unique relationship with the U.S., the Compacts of Free Association, that allowed them to live and work in the U.S., that gives U.S. financial support for services, that gives them U.S. Postal Service. But what they gave was a deep tie to the U.S. that includes strategic denial, so foreign militaries can't operate there without U.S. acquiescence, and the U.S. can deploy in various capacities across that whole Central Pacific. So that was decided here in Saipan. And that's what allows the U.S. to get to the first and second island chain. That's what makes the Central Pacific the strategic heartland of the U.S. Because as was found out in World War II, if a foreign power controls that whole area, which Japan did for 30 years, the U.S. isn't safe. But if it's free and open and outside the control of an aggressive foreign power, economies can flourish across the region and the U.S. is safe. So what's going on now is China is very actively, through political warfare, trying to undermine that agreement across those 3 countries, Palau, Micronesia, Marshall Islands. And one of the ways that they're doing it is they're coming in through the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands here, the U.S. This location allows Chinese to enter without a visa. The woman that runs, that represents CNMI in the U.S. Congress has been advocating for a lifting of the caps on direct flights, and we'll get to all of that. But I'd like to now talk about the place is beautiful, and the place also has heroes. And one of the great heroes, American heroes, was the governor of the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands, Arnold Palacios, who passed away on July 23rd. We had the privilege of knowing Governor Palacios personally. He spoke at FDD. I recommend everybody go and watch it. It's incredibly insightful, but also touching. He spoke about how trying to clean up corruption in the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands was left him feeling like John the Baptist, and how lonely a fight it was. And that's because since the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, I'll just say Northern Mariana Islands from now on, joined the U.S. because of its little loopholes here and there around labor laws and immigration laws. Some of the worst people in the world, but also some pretty dodgy Americans, have tried to use it as an entry point. So this was the Chinese set up garment factories with slave labor-like conditions. I mean, they had people just horrible, horrible stories. But that was facilitated in part by Jack Abramoff. There's always a domestic component to the facilitation of these outside forces. The Chinese Communist Party is going to do what the Chinese Communist Party does. And it's up to us to try to defend against it. And that's what Governor Palacios tried to do. And he did it as part of caring about his people. So to give you two other examples of the sort of things he did, there is a move now to permit the Marianas US dollar digital currency to facilitate online gambling. Governor Palacios vetoed that. It went back to the legislature where that veto was overridden, and it passed. He also, at a very personal level, did things like tried to make sure that there was a public cemetery available here, because they're burying people 4 feet deep in other cemeteries. There's a private one, there are church ones. And so he would advocate just for things like a cemetery for his people. This is across the board. He looked to see what the problems were for the people of CNMI and tried to fix them with calm, grace, and humor. So that's the sort of man he was. But the problems were just enormous. When he came in as governor in 22, he looked at back at what had happened during the COVID era. Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands was given about $1.6 billion in various federal fundings, including ARPA funding and CARES funding. And it was not properly accounted for. And this is a place with a population of 45,000 people. $1.6 billion is a lot of money. And he wanted to find out what happened to it. The previous governor, Governor Torres, remember that name because you'll hear it again, hadn't kept proper books. And so Governor Palacios, who just passed away, asked everybody. He asked Treasury, he asked FBI, he asked everybody he could, please come and audit us. I've never seen an American public official say, chips fall where they may, everything is open to you. Come and look, come and poke around, interview anybody you like. My staff is totally available to you. My books are available to you. I just want to clean up the territory that I am responsible for because I'm desperately concerned about the future of my people if this corruption continues. Under previous Governor Torres, there was a casino that was set up here that Governor Torres initially was against. The population here was against casinos. They voted against casinos. But he went on a trip to Hong Kong and Macau, along with several other legislators, and came back big supporter of casinos, specifically an exclusive license for a Chinese casino. They wrote the legislation and it passed. And within the first few months of it operating, it was running $5.3 billion in 3 months through less than 20 tables in a casino smaller than an Olive Garden. It was, according to a very good Bloomberg article from 2018 that spoke to several casino experts, there's very little chance that was a legitimate operation. So if it was of concern, that means that there was Chinese-linked casino running billions of dollars into the U.S. economy, and there's no way that could happen without the Chinese Communist Party's approval if not benefiting in some way, sort of more or less directly from it. And again, that was under Governor Ralph Torres. Governor Ralph Torres had a chief of staff called Angel Demipan. Angel Demipan is also a former legislator who was helpful in drafting some of the legislation related to the casino. After that, after being chief of staff for Governor Torres, he went on to become legislative director for the current representative from CNMI in the U.S. Congress, a woman called Kimberlyn King-Hines. Kimberlyn King-Hines, Representative King-Hines, is the one who's pushing for a continuation of the situation where Chinese don't have tourists. So for many, many years, Chinese could come in here without a visa and nothing, just get on a flight in China, get off here, no checks. They weren't supposed to then leave the jurisdiction, but by at least the hundreds, they were getting on boats and going. As mentioned, Guam's about 60 miles away from Rota, going into Guam, disappearing. Some of them were arrested there for selling meth. There was human trafficking, but also they were found wandering around military bases, the big U.S. military bases in Guam. It became untenable for there just to continue to be no visa. So they created this kind of fiction, which they called an enhanced vetting program. The initials for it are EVS TAP, and sold it as the term they kept using was enhanced vetting. Now, it was enhanced from a starting point of 0, so 5% could be enhanced, but there was never any justification for why they needed this EVS TAP as opposed to just requiring Chinese to get a visa to come into CNMI like they do to every other part of the United States. I checked actually just yesterday to see what the wait time is to get a B1 or B2 visa if you're in Beijing. On the State Department website, the wait times for each location are listed by months. So if you're in Delhi, it takes 5.5 months to get an interview for a B1 or B2 visa to come to the U.S. If you're in Beijing, it takes 0 months. So it's very difficult to see if it takes 0 months to get a normal B1, B2 visa to come to the rest of the United States, why that couldn't be applied here. But she is extremely insistent on this EVS TAP, and she has been enlisting other members of Congress to support her. There was a letter from Congressman Niles from Texas 22, who is a very staunch defender of the border, supporting the EVS TAP. She herself was on radio here, local radio, on July 30th, talking about how Jim Jordan had supported her EVS TAP program, and how Representative Mast seems to have been quite supportive. So I don't know what she's actually telling them, but I think that they would be very surprised that they were supporting a program that allowed Chinese to come in without a visa. And I think perhaps she doesn't realize, or maybe she doesn't care, what this will do when their opposition finds out, because now whoever runs against them can legitimately ask them, why do you support Chinese coming into the U.S. without a visa? So you can see how this, I don't know what her relationship is with all these other things, except I do know that when she was on the Ports Authority here, she approved the setting up of a different Chinese casino, Chinese-linked casino, right on the dual-use harbor in Tinian, where the U.S. is putting in hundreds of millions of dollars rehabilitating the old Northfield site, which is where the Enola Gay took off from, and was the busiest airfield in the world when the B-29s were taking off to bomb Japan, again, just over 80 years ago. So these are American public servants, right? And why am I bringing this up specifically now? Her legislative director, Angel Demipan, who I mentioned, who was chief of staff for Governor Torres, helped draft the legislation for the first Chinese casino, worked with her. She was trying to push through this lifting of caps on direct flights from mainland China, which hasn't happened, but the unblocking of the EVS TAP, which has, is now the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Insular Affairs at the Department of Interior. And I mentioned that Governor Palacios worked very hard to get a public cemetery. And he will be tomorrow, or within a few hours now, he will be the first person to be buried at that cemetery. And yesterday I attended the consecration of the cemetery grounds. And the key speaker representing the U.S. government was Angel Demipan, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Insular Affairs at the Department of Interior, who helped write the legislation to push through the Chinese casino and who has been very supportive of Chinese coming in without a visa. And that's what's going on here. And everybody who is there knows. They're going, where is the rest of the U.S.? We're Americans. You know, you're building military bases here to protect us from the kinetic warfare. Where is the defense against the political warfare? You know, what's going on? And so Arnold Palacios, Governor Palacios, did everything he could to ensure that, you know, if you had talked about Saipan in DC, people will all roll if they've heard of it, they'll roll their eyes and they'll go, oh, that place is incredibly corrupt. It's like from the movie Chinatown, you know, where people will go, forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown. And it is literally becoming Chinatown. And what happens here doesn't stay here. The woman that ran the Bureau of Motor Vehicles here was convicted of selling U.S. driver's licenses to Chinese who are unlawfully here. They're going by boats to Guam. They're using the U.S. Postal Service to distribute meth. I mean, these are all cases where people have been caught and convicted. And they're coming into the financial structures and have companies here that are very influential, including some that are in the Chamber of Commerce that are lobbying for all sorts of things. Representative King Hines is supposed to be, she has announced that small business congressional delegation from Congress is supposed to come here in August, where she can explain to them, in her words, the nuances of the economy here, which will undoubtedly mean, you know, why there is a need to continue to allow Chinese to come in without a visa and all that. By the way, just to clear up that argument, currently, or in February, the latest numbers I have, there were 8 to 10 times more Korean tourists here than there were Chinese tourists, even though they haven't met the cap on direct flights, and even though they still can't come in without a visa. So this fiction that the Chinese are the sole ones supporting the economy, and if you make them apply the 0 months in Beijing to get a visa, suddenly the economy will collapse, is not accurate. It's not borne out by the facts. And if they're pushing for that, something else is going on. It's like the U.S. is a house, all the other doors and windows are locked, and they want to make sure this one window is left open. So Governor Palacios repeatedly came to D.C. to say, help me close the window and help me build my house, reinforce the foundation, put on the roof. And that hasn't happened. So the question, you know, will the western border survive? Will it remain secure? Governor Palacios did more than his bit. And I can tell you there are a lot of people here on the ground who come and talk to me who want to do their bit also. But the situation here is so complex. Representative King Hines, who we just spoke about, her husband is the chief prosecutor in the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands. And Governor Torres, who we spoke about before, who brought in the casino, or was part of bringing in the casino, is rumored to be considering running for governor again in November 26. Whether Governor Palacios' legacy continues is up to us. The director of the FBI recently announced that they're opening up a field office in New Zealand. Well, it would be nice to have a functioning field office, at least in Guam. We are an 8-hour flight west of Hawaii, but we're 4 hours, as mentioned, from some pretty unusual, you know, all sorts of economic forces in Asia. If we don't come to the assistance of the people of the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands, then it will be very, very difficult to withstand the political warfare that is pouring in through this border, and it will get to every other part of the United States through here. That I think is at least a secondary goal. The primary goal is to make, to come in, I think, and put themselves in a position where Guam becomes very difficult to defend, and whatever is being put in here isn't operational when the time comes. So you can put in your hundreds of millions of dollars for your divert airfield on Tinian, but if you haven't checked out what's in that building on the harbor that is now shut down, it's maybe we just don't know what's in it, and checked out what's going on with the grid, and checked out how many people are coming in on EVS taps and how many people are leaving. How many people have come in? Those numbers aren't available. So will it survive? It's up to us. There are a lot of people here who want it to. And in the memory of Governor Arnold Palacios, who did everything he could, I would request that please let's clean up Chinatown.
Cleo, especially with being jet lagged, that was a tour de force in terms of really laying out what is at stake, what is happening, and some of the individuals that are playing, especially in the absence of Governor Palacios, potentially very problematic role, including, it sounds like, people working for the government at the moment, federal government at that. We're going to come back to you with some questions to further tease a lot of this out, but before we do, we have two other presenters, both of whom are familiar to this audience, I think, and should be, certainly because of their preeminence in this particular arena of what the Chinese Communist Party is about, what it is up to, and what it means for us. We're going to go first to Gordon G. Chang. Gordon is perhaps the most prominent critic of the Chinese Communist Party in the United States today. He is a distinguished senior fellow of the Gatestone Institute and a columnist for Newsweek magazine. He is the author of a number of books, including most recently Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. He is a frequent guest on my program, Securing America, and was kind enough to allow me to interview him earlier today and apply part of that program for this purpose of giving some thoughts about, well, who's responsible for what's happening in the Northern Marianas at the moment, and inform our need to hold such people accountable. Let's go to the video of my interview with Gordon G. Chang on Securing America today. This is a welcome that I'm particularly delighted to make to Gordon G. Chang, one of our great resources here at Securing America, with whom we've not spoken in altogether too long. We're always delighted to be able to catch up with him. He is a senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute, a columnist for Newsweek. He is also the author, most recently, of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. He is everywhere, fortunately, including on our air, and we are always very, very grateful for his time. Welcome back, Gordon. Good to have you with us, sir.
Well, thank you, Frank.
I wanted to start. We're doing a webinar as we speak this afternoon with our friend Cleo Pascal, who has been warning, as have you, for quite some time now, about the inroads that the Chinese Communist Party is making in the islands of the Western Pacific to essentially restore, I guess one might say, the presence there of a hostile totalitarian power such as we've not faced since we liberated them all in the course of World War II. The concern is that that would be a very bad thing for, obviously, regional interests, but also for our own. And I wonder if you might speak to this issue of the lengths to which the Chinese are going to establish, through various ways and means in various places, a presence that will be hostile to us and to our vital interests.
China wants to control all of the Pacific, and clearly this is part of a long-term plan. They're very good at it. They've been very determined. You know, Frank, I don't look at this as an issue of China. I look at this as an issue of the United States. These islands some of them are actually part of the United States. Guam, for instance. Others are commonwealths, which are effectively part of the United States, and we've ignored it. So, the Chinese want to control it. They're using corruption. You know, it's basically the Chinese playbook from around the world. But this is an issue of Americans letting them do it. This is our territory. This is our country. So, let's complain about the Chinese, but let's look at ourselves, because we have the ability to stop this. We have the ability to remove the Chinese from these areas. We can enforce our laws. We're not doing any of this. So, shame on us.
Point taken, Gordon. And I guess in terms of how we might displace them, what are you thinking of as the tools available to us for the purpose?
First of all, let's enforce our laws. We know that the Chinese are engaging in all sorts of criminal practices, including buying of officials. And the FBI is not interested at all in this, which is, to me, incomprehensible. Of course, there's all sorts of domestic concerns about the FBI. But we've got a foreign enemy that is assaulting us. So let's stop worrying about Democrats. Let's start worrying about the country that intends to kill Americans and has been killing Americans through fentanyl and COVID and all the rest of it. I have this very little patience for domestic squabbling right now in the face of a foreign enemy. And Frank, this is how we lose our country. We are the strongest country by far, almost every metric. But we can lose our country, and we can lose it very soon because we're not confronting the Chinese enemy. Let me calm down. But in terms of what we do, we enforce our law. We don't allow Chinese tourists into these areas. We don't allow flights from China. And we have all sorts of pressures on those islands for more Chinese tourists. So that's what we do there. We remove their businesses from them, and we start getting ICE. They might worry about some family in Los Angeles that has been there for 3 decades and now is going to deport them. But I think they should be using their resources as the #1 priority to make sure the Chinese networks in these islands are broken up and the Chinese are either imprisoned or expelled. So this is really important. It's a question of priorities. Yes, we should deport every illegal alien, but we need to break up the Chinese networks first, because these networks actually threaten the security of our nation and even maybe its existence.
Gordon Chang, where we go from there is to explore a little bit further the strategic issues that are in play in all of this, with a man who has done an incredibly important service to our country, starting in his time as a naval intelligence officer, and the Chiron incorrectly identified Gordon Chang as one, but this is one of our most accomplished veterans of the U.S. Navy's intelligence service, and that would be Captain James Fennell, United States Navy, retired. Captain Fennell is someone who, notably during his final duty station as the Chief of Intelligence and information operations for the U.S. Pacific Fleet, saw what the Chinese were doing and warned very, I think, insightfully about what would be coming, in particular in a decade of concern in which we now find ourselves, namely in which the Chinese have put into place not simply the means to wage this pre-kinetic, unrestricted warfare against us, but the old-fashioned shooting kind as well. He is a very important member of our Committee on the Present Danger China, and someone with whom we have collaborated closely in a number of ways, including by also featuring him on our television program, Securing America. We caught up with him earlier today on the show and have asked him to basically discuss what amounts to unilateral disarmament with respect to the hard-won islands of the Central Pacific and the degree to which our mortal enemy is likely to benefit from such disarmament. Let's go to the videotape with Captain Fennell at this point.
It's a very strategic area, and the happenings that have been going on in this American territory of the Northern Marianas, we wouldn't know a lot of it except for Cleo Pascal and folks like Grant Newsham, but Cleo especially has been in country, in the region, meeting and talking with these people over several years. And so when we learned of the death, untimely death of the governor early this month, or last month now, in July, a lot of concern about what were the circumstances of that and the whole surrounding of his passing. But more importantly, his life and his message brought up the fact that what we're really talking about is this infiltration of the People's Republic of China into American territory. And so one of the things that, in addition to all the depth of knowledge that Cleo is providing, I am concerned about the fact that while the President of the United States has talked about that the United States border is closed, I think we should be really precise in saying the continental United States borders have closed on the northern and southern borders with Canada and Mexico. But it's clear from what Cleo's told us and what we know from the fact that Chinese can come in without visas into the Northern Marianas, that we have an open border in this very strategic area. And so in addition to getting the FBI and other agencies in there to investigate what China's done in terms of money laundering and corruption in that government, we need to have the Secretary of Homeland Security, the border czar, and maybe even the Department of the Interior looking into what's going on there so that we can cauterize and seal this off. Because if we don't, the implications are severe. And as we've been talking about, and we know this is area that we fought for over 80 years ago. And American Marines especially, but sailors and others, died fighting on these islands throughout the Northern Marianas and other parts of the Pacific and the Western Pacific and the South Pacific and the Oceania, these island nations like the Solomons and Kiribati, Tarawa. And so if we allow the Chinese to infiltrate, not just to have corruption and influence our governments there, but they're undoubtedly infiltrating what I would call a fifth column of not just political agitators and political warfare agents, but they're going to infiltrate military actors, people that are going to, in the event of hostilities, whether the Chinese decide to invade Taiwan this year, next year, 2027, or by 2030, those people that are from the PLA that have come into these areas, into our territory, they can be used to disrupt our military operations, and they'll undoubtedly be used to kill American Marines again. So nobody wants to see that, and that's why this issue is so strategically important. I mean, geographically, Saipan, Tinian, these bases are closer to China than they are to than Guam is. So it gives the Chinese a stepping stone, if you will, to be able to step from mainland China across the first island chain into these islands and then be able to easily reach Guam or other areas. Who knows what they could do with covert operations, with special operations forces. Their submarine force can be used to infiltrate more supplies and ammunition or things of that nature in the extreme case. There's no evidence of that now, but one of the failures that we have in our intelligence community, in our government, in our quote unquote China hands in Washington, D.C., is that we do what I call this carpenter's rule of assessment. We snap a chalk line and we say, well, there's no ammunition there today. There are no Chinese submarines in Tinian today. There's no Chinese tanks or bombers in Saipan today, so there's nothing to worry about. But if you look at the strategic trend line of what China's been doing over the last 25 years and their expansion across the Pacific, you have to project in your mind and your intelligence to say, where will they be in 5 years? Where will they be in 10 years? And how will they use those facilities that we're upgrading right now, that Indo-Pacific Command is upgrading? How can those be turned around and co-opted by the PLA to be used against us to dominate the Pacific and destroy America's military capacity in this region, from our air forces and our 7th Fleet and Pacific Fleet, and obviously the Marines of the 3rd Marine Division out of Okinawa and other places in the Pacific there. So we have a big problem where we're not recognizing that, and as you said, and I think Cleo says it as well, I mean, people are not educated that this is American territory. It's not a state per se, so it doesn't have the same legal status in some areas, but it is American territory. And Americans have died for it, they fought for it, and they risked their lives for it 80 years ago. And through our own neglect and hubris and laziness and arrogance over the last 80 years, we've neglected this. We've neglected it from a political warfare perspective. We've neglected it from a good partner perspective. And with a little bit more investment and a little bit more attention to this, we can get this back, because the people in these islands are inclined to be supportive of us because they know what we did. They agree with our values. They don't agree with the Chinese Communist Party's totalitarian dictatorship. They don't want any part of that. They're willing to go there if no one else will help them. And so it's time for Americans to step up.
Captain Pinnell, as usual, very incisive and very timely warning from you. Cleo, I want to basically, as I said earlier, explore some of the points that you made and our other colleagues to further illuminate what I think is clearly a strategic problem of the first order. And just to be clear, when Chinese tourists come to this island Saipan or others in the chain, I guess, you mentioned at one point that they're supposed to stay in that territory. Are they actually able to get to the United States, having gotten inside it, without further processing or visas and so on as well?
Not legally, but as we've seen by how many of them have been found in Guam, I went to Rhodes, the island that's the closest to Guam, and an official there was telling me that it's so overt that they actually had one Chinese guy arrive on a flight to Rhodes with an inflatable dinghy as his luggage, and they have Chinese who will go around knocking on the doors of people who have boats in their yards asking to buy the boat. Now, these are clearly not top operatives, but if you are a top operative, I think it can be not very complicated. And also remember that there are a lot of yachts that flow through this area. And there's one story that needs to be verified, which is when the casino was operating, there was a yacht that had left here and ran into trouble closer to the coast of Asia. And another boat came and started unloading bricks of cash from it. I don't know whether that is a true story or not. And we should know whether that's a true story or not. This stuff, the investigations are not hard. It's really, really not hard. It's all there. It's in the campaign financing documents, in the tax records, and Treasury, FBI. There were two, just quickly, because again, I just want to get to the point. These are Americans, and they have been let down by their federal government. Two of the FBI agents who were here in part to investigate that Chinese casino ended up leaving the FBI and working in one way or another associated with Governor Torres. This is not, the corruption that is here has been facilitated not just by neglect by Americans from the rest of the country, but by some pretty dodgy Americans, and it's flowing both ways. All of the people that I mentioned who are the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Interior, the woman who's representing CNMI in Congress, the former governor, they're all Americans. And they are bringing this way of operating into the U.S. Congress, into the Department of Interior. And it's the American people across the country who will suffer from this.
This is obviously now quite systemic, isn't it? That the corruption, the casino in particular, I'm very interested in the role that you see it playing in, enabling not only the Chinese penetration and corruption and influence operations. But you kind of touched on this and alluded to it. I just want to draw you out. Are you saying that it could also conceal, more overtly and offensively oriented military operations as well? Or did you suggest that it's been shut down, or is it still a going concern?
So the casino itself was operated by a company called IPI. During the construction, I mentioned that it was running out of a smaller location, and we're in the process of building a massive building with a gilded front, like it looks like it's out of Vegas, but they were using, at least in part, illegal Chinese workers. And one of them fell off the scaffolding during the construction and died. And so there was an investigation. I think labor got involved. And that's the thing. There are all these different departments in the U.S. that can come and help. And as a result, construction was shut down. So if you see it now, somebody described it to me yesterday, local actually, as representing what China actually is, because it's got this glittering facade. It's very poorly built. It's half finished. The marble is just a very thin veneer, and it was built on an ancestral burial ground. So it's morally corrupt. It destroys what was there of spiritual worth beforehand. It is not structurally viable over the long term, but it kind of looks pretty from the outside. So that's what's there now. That company kind of went into bankruptcy during COVID, but there's a new company right now that is bidding on the assets, and the reporting is that there are some linkages between the new company, which presents as Japanese, but actually it looks like at least key components of it are Chinese, and that there are linkages between the new company that's trying to get a hold of the assets, which includes the exclusive gambling license, and the old company. It just needs investigation. If I know elements of this, pretty much everybody on the island does, and it doesn't take a lot of digging. It just takes building trust.
Yeah. And Cleo, this is a point you made powerfully, and I want to just further illuminate it. We have been undermining that trust. I think it's fair to say. Closing an FBI investigation, as I understand it, not so long ago, closing the office or whatever there was of the FBI on the island, as I understand it. And I know everything I know about the subject from our conversations about it, so correct me on all of it if I've got it wrong. But and then the kind of well, as you say, the corrupting influence on the society that some of these politicians or representatives have been, or their staff have been exhibiting. Is it an overstatement to say that we're in the process of losing, well, for want of a better expression, the hearts and minds of the people of the CNMI?
Not to be too dramatic, but I think it's more. I think it's deeper than that. I mean, so what inspired Governor Palacios on his lonely fight that he didn't know whether he could win or not against very powerful, well-funded players here backed by the Chinese Communist Party? And it was his faith. And a lot of the people who are fighting here, in fact, somebody said to me yesterday that you come into the world naked and you leave naked, and all you have is your soul. And what this corruption is doing, it's corrupting the politics and it's corrupting the economy, but it's corrupting the soul of the nation through the individuals. And you can visualize it. You can see this sort of, the like dropping of black ink into a pool and just watching it spread. And so, I mean, it really is that it's destroying families. And this is where the trust thing comes in. People will tell me, look, I'd like to talk to you, but my cousin or my uncle or whatever, is involved in this, and I have to protect the family. They have kids. If they lose their job, then their wife. It gets right into what it is to be a human, and it can twist you to the point where you're making decisions that you think are the morally right decisions, but they're just not. And they're going to, and down the line, by the time you figure it out, it's too late. And I think that happened. The Chinese Communist Party operatives are extremely good at doing this. Why don't you just take this $10,000? It will help you put your kid through school. And then they've got you. You work really hard. You really deserve a vacation. Why don't you come to Hong Kong and we'll show you, we'll give you the vacation that you deserve for being such a hard working public servant for so long. And then they've got the videotapes on you. So it's corrosive at a level that is just fundamental. It's right into the soul of humanity. And on the FBI thing, as I understand it, there was an FBI field office at some point in Guam, and what I'm told is there isn't any longer. And if there is no FBI field office in Guam, and Director Patel is very focused on moving people out of DC to the point of opening up one in New Zealand, it would be good maybe if there isn't one in Guam, it should be reopened with jurisdiction over the Northern Mariana Islands. Right. If there is one, it should be upstaffed. And just last point, it should not be staffed by locals. Mm-hmm. So people will say, you hire a local, they really understand the local culture. You need the advice of locals, but can be much more difficult for locals to operate. And I think that may have been one of the things that happened in Interior. Get a local to be the DAS for insular affairs. Just because you're local doesn't mean anything. You can have a Palacios who's a local, and you can have somebody who's fronting for a Chinese casino who's a local. It comes to what's inside, not to what's outside.
Right. Such a key point. Let me turn to the military piece of this. Several of you touched on it, but again, this is particularly Guam, but as you say, Tinian is expected to become part of the front line of America's defenses on its western border, as you've described it. And I want you to tease out a little bit further, if you would, that the idea of this being sort of the western heartland of America. But if the Chinese are present in these islands in some numbers, and they may be there as tourists, they may be there as casino operators or, workers building the place or what have you. But Cleo, how would you assess the likelihood that such individuals would, without much difficulty, be able to do what I think Gordon was suggesting, which is to say neutralize whatever else we're doing on those islands in case of particularly a shooting war or maybe the run-up to it at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party?
So Chinese individuals are hostages of the Chinese state. And this is legally enshrined in the 2017 National Intelligence Law, which requires every Chinese citizen and Chinese organization to support, which includes the companies, to support Chinese intelligence collection efforts and operations. It's legal, it's the law. So if you have relatives in China or you have economic ties back to China, they have you. So you can be, and I won't specify to protect the person, but I have a very good Chinese friend who had been living outside of China. She was a citizen of another country. She working very hard for many years. And I was with this person when they got a phone call from their professional organization, somebody who claimed to be from their professional organization, telling them who to vote for in the election in that professional organization. And my friend was shaken. She thought she had escaped it all, but the mother still lived in China. And so they knew that they had a hold on my friend to the point of being able to tell my friend who to vote for in the professional organization election. And they clearly cared who won that professional organization election because it advanced something for the Chinese Communist Party. So I just to explain, there are actual operatives whose job is to be emplaced, and you can put in a divert airfield on Tinian and you can have the best planes and the best runway, but if the pilots are incapacitated before they can get to the planes, you win. But you also have just people who are maybe trying to escape the Chinese Communist Party, but if they have ties back, they are, no matter where they are, they're hostages. You can't leave China without the Chinese Communist Party knowing you left China. And that's one of the things that needs to be understood about the tourists is, they had went through a process on the Chinese side to get a passport, to get a visa. They are tracked. The government knows everybody who leaves the country and where they're going and what they're doing. We have to get away from thinking that China is just like us. It really, really isn't.
Though there's reason to believe that we're becoming more like them all the time, unfortunately, in some very unsettling ways. But that's a subject for another day. Cleo, you've been very generous with your time, and it's exceedingly late, and I know you are jet lagged, but you've done a wonderful job. Could I just ask a final question? Because Gordon touched on it, but I want to get your thoughts on it as well, and maybe in so doing, if you could back the lens up a little bit, because while we've principally focused on this, confederation in this part of the Central Pacific, the heartland, there are a number of other important islands in the surrounding area, some a distance away, given the size of the Pacific, but that I know you feel similarly, very strongly, are neglected at our peril. And again, in most cases, I think, the important ones at least, we actually fought and in some cases bled and in other cases died to extract from the clutches of a previous totalitarian power, the Imperial Japan. So if you could talk about what do we need to be doing right now, specifically with respect to the Northern Marianas, but why this is important to the larger question of what we must be doing to counter Chinese political warfare and influence operations and gray zone activities, as they're called in some quarters, possibly leading up to a shooting war at their hands.
So thank you for asking that, and I'll tell you what's going on right now in Guadalcanal, if you like. Yeah, and the term, by the way, that the Filipinos use, which I like quite a lot, they call it illegal, coercive, aggressive, and deceptive. They say, so the initials are ICAD. They say what the Chinese are, because gray zone is a little fuzzy, so they say illegal, coercive, aggressive, and deceptive, and that really does cover a lot of it. So Guadalcanal, the island of Guadalcanal, is in the country of the Solomon Islands, which was recognized Taiwan until 2019 and then flipped to China. Two things that are going on there. One, to give an idea of the toll on the individual, there was a premier of one of the provinces, Daniel Suidani, who at the time of the switch wanted to keep Chinese companies out of his province because he was very concerned about how they behave, but also, and again, this keeps coming up over and over, at least in the Pacific. He actually said in the communique that was issued by his government, one of their concerns was that the Chinese Communist Party was systemically atheist, whereas they believed in freedom of religion, and they didn't want that component operating in Malaita. Anyway, the Chinese and their proxies went after him, and it's a long story, but it's very instructive to understand the mechanisms of political warfare and how individuals are targeted. And they used everything from trying to deny health care to funding his political opponents. And we can go into it another time. But the latest phase is lawfare. So he and one of his close associates are on trial for unlawful assembly. There were originally 3 charges, but they had to drop the first one because he wasn't even in the country. Like the charges are so spurious that, but even when he was premier of the province, he was making $800 a month. This is destroying the family economically. It's a constant stress. So that's what's happening at the individual level. And at the national level, the main regional organization is the Pacific Islands Forum. And so that brings leaders from all over together. And it's going to be in September in Solomon Islands. And the Solomon Islands government has effectively now barred Taiwanese from entry. So 3 countries in the Pacific Island Forum, Palau, Marshall Islands, and Tuvalu, recognize Taiwan. So this not only, and Taiwan is has observer status at the Pacific Island Forum, but undoubtedly at the behest of Beijing, Solomon Islands has now blocked Taiwanese access to Solomon Islands, which means they can't attend the Pacific Island Forum. And so we're now going to see what the countries who recognize Taiwan do. So it's a very clear example of how China is very happy to create chaos, fragmentation, this sort of entropic warfare at the individual level, destroy the families through fentanyl, through lawfare, but also at the regional level, destroy the organizations unless they submit to a Chinese way of doing things.
Wow.
Quickly, if you want, because you asked about what to do. So
Please.
So this is, I think that from a U.S. government perspective, there need to be 3.5 different policies towards how to deal with the Pacific Islands, because you tend to get this blob, right? But as we can see, the Pacific Islands, what falls under that rubric, varies from Hawaii, which is a state of the U.S., to the Solomon Islands, which is an independent country where a lot of Americans died, but the U.S. is actually dealing with it via mostly Australia, even though there's a U.S. embassy there, there's no ambassador, there's no consular services, and it takes the lead from Australia. So there's a very wide variance. And depending on the legal relationship between the U.S. and a specific Pacific island, there's a different toolkit. So saying that you're just looking at them all as a big blob is not, it doesn't reflect the different security priorities for the U.S., and it doesn't reflect the different toolkits the U.S. has for dealing with the region. So I think there are 3.5 different ways of dealing with it. The first is parts of the Pacific Islands that are the U.S. So Hawaii, Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, Guam, American Samoa, that's a whole different toolkit. You can send in the federal government, you can send in the FBI, send in Treasury, all that stuff. That's one bucket. The second are the 3 U.S. freely associated states, the ones that have that compact of free association with the U.S. that I mentioned, that where they can come and work in the U.S., they serve in the U.S. military, the U.S. Has strategic denial. That's Palau, Marshall Islands, Federated States of Micronesia. Those get dealt with separately. Now, there's overlap in some places, but there's a different toolkit, and there are different priorities from the Chinese side about how to undermine them. Then the third category is all the rest of the Pacific Islands, like the Solomon Islands and Kiribati and Tonga. Those are a different bucket, different toolkit. And then the half are the 3 countries that recognize Taiwan, because they're being targeted in a very different way by China. And because they recognize Taiwan, you can bring in Taiwan as a partner to help them defend themselves from the political warfare. So you have these, and allies is also different. If you're looking at a place like Palau, Japan is a much better ally than Australia. Japan has a historical linkage there. It's geographically much closer. The Australians have no historical linkage there. But if you're looking somewhere else, maybe you're justified to bring in Australia or New Zealand. But the Australian and New Zealand diplomatic community have spent a lot of time in D.C. trying to convince the U.S. that the Pacific is this one whole that you deal with through the Pacific Island Forum and the Pacific Futures 2050, whatever it is, and Canberra and Wellington are the Pacific Island whisperers, and everything has to run through them. And as a result, you're getting this bottom-up look at the Pacific, as opposed to what was crafted by Americans who fought in World War II, from John F. Kennedy through to Bush Sr., who fought in the Pacific and lost friends in the Pacific. They created an architecture that has ultimately been expressed in that map that we saw at the very beginning, where there are these parts of the U.S. like the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas and Guam, but there are also these 3 islands in the middle, which is the core of the Central Pacific, because they realized, in fact, like McKinley did and like Teddy Roosevelt did, that if you can't get across the Pacific, or if a hostile power is in the middle of the Pacific, the U.S. isn't safe and you can't trade. So it's a matter of those 3.5, which tells you what the U.S. strategic and economic priorities are. This is an architecture that's been developed over 150 years of American foreign policy, and it gives you the different toolkits and the different leaders that should be involved in implementing those policies.
Where can people find more out about those toolkits and implementation of the policies? Is that
so? This is the first time that I've talked about it publicly.
Well, I think we've outed it.
So if I ever get any sleep, I'll write it up.
Good. Okay. Well, I hope that you will in the very near future. Let me just say, Khalil, that one of the things that you sort of, again, alluded to, but that in our previous conversations you've impressed upon me, and I think is intangible, but it's illustrative of your deep insight into these islands and the subject more generally of, how are they faring as they become increasingly targets of aggressive Chinese influence operations. And that is, how are we interacting with them, dealing with them, treating them in the form of, for example, sending a high-level delegation to honor Governor Palacios, to express solidarity about his commitment to being part of the United States and his, public service ethos as it related to trying to audit what may well be corrupt government entities and practices. And sadly, a deputy assistant secretary from the islands, perhaps, yes, but nonetheless, someone who, from what you've indicated here, may well be part of the problem in a lot of respects, is hardly an appropriate indication of the importance of these islands, or what should be the importance of them, and our appreciation of that importance. And I think this is a work in progress, but if there is in fact a congressional delegation coming through on the small business side, and it's under the influence of this representative in Congress who may not be entirely on the up and up herself, it makes all the more important something that I've been encouraging others like the committee, select committee in the House of Representatives, whose responsibility is the competition with the Chinese Communist Party. Its chairman, John Molinar, was on this program last week. He's doing very important work in that committee, as I think you know, Cleo. It would seem to me that a field hearing by that committee in the Northern Marianas, for example, would be a very important signal of not only, our appreciation of the islands and their people, but also the solidarity that we feel with them in a time of increasing CCP aggression. So I'm hopeful that he will take that under advisement and act on it. A field hearing in Saipan, for example, and I hope, if you don't mind going back, it's a long way to go, but if you don't mind going back, that you will be a lead witness there if this does come to pass. Let me just conclude by saying, Cleo, that you being there on the occasion of this ceremony, this funeral, this honoring of a fallen hero, I know means a lot to his family, and I hope that they will appreciate having arguably the world's leading expert on these islands, and certainly one who has done as much as anybody, either in your native Canada or south of the border here in the United States, to elevate the importance of these places. I hope will be seen as an evidence that there is, in fact, a commitment to them and to their being part of the western frontier of our country, and their security and their prosperity and their appropriate treatment by the rest of us is now in prospect. And if so, it will be thanks in very, very substantial measure to your great work. So thank you for all of that. And thank you for getting up in the middle of the night, jet-lagged as you are, to contribute so importantly to this program. I thank as well our friends Gordon Chang and Captain James Fennell for their contribution to the program as well. And let me just hasten to add, I mean to do this each time, but I always want you to appreciate, ladies and gentlemen, the important role that our friend Oleg Atbashian makes all these things work. She's not with us at the moment. She's on assignment elsewhere, but Didi Laugesen as well played calculably important role in helping the Committee on the Present Danger of China do its work, and I'm deeply grateful to them for doing so. As I'm deeply grateful to all of you who participate live in these programs. Your subscription to them for free at presentdangerchina.org ensures that you find out about them. We change the times around, unfortunately, often at the last moment, but please do sign up at presentdangerchina.org and participate in them as often as you can. And we always say, once the final product is in hand, and it's usually within hours of the end of the program, thanks to Oleg, please make sure that others in your circles of influence are aware of them, and especially on a time like this, the important insights that we've shared and the actions that will enable us to have better policies in place and hopefully deter the Chinese Communist Party from what it clearly has in mind, which I believe is taking these islands, denying us their use, and otherwise undermining our position in the Pacific and that of the free world more generally. So with that, we'll say goodbye and God bless, and thank you again for participating in this program.
The recording has stopped.
Thank you, Cleo.
Thank you.